I just need to talk to you a little bit about energy before we delve into photosynthesis, or maybe you've already delved into it in class. Either way, we need to get a little bit of an understanding in energy and biological systems. Our focus for this week and the week after spring break is going to be on two of our energy pathways, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And so, first of all, we need to make sure that we understand the organelles where these take place. And we've mentioned endosymbiosis about 4 times this year, but this is the official place where we talk about endosymbiosis. And so we got to talk about how we have two organelles. Well, we only have one. Plants have two, and other autotrophs have two, but we only have one. But there are two organelles that are both energy processing organelles that that go with this endosymbiosis theory. So when you're looking at endosymbiosis, that word means like symbiosis means like life together. So maybe you remember like mutualism, where like, you know, the butterfly pollinates the plant, helps both of them kind of thing. It's life together. And that's symbiosis. Endosymbiosis is that life together with one of them being inside the other. And so that's why it's called that, because basically the endosymbiotic theory says that there were two independent bacteria. You can see one in the little image is green and one is purple, and one bacterium engulfs the other, and then one bacteria lives inside the other, and both bacteria benefit from the arrangement, and then the internal bacteria is passed on from generation to generation. So the theory is this is how prokaryotes really got their start, and that's how mitochondria and chloroplast wound up inside of cells, even though we have some very interesting things going on. So one of the most important parts for energy, as far as it goes, like energy forming or energy pathways in terms of these organelles, is the double membrane. And so in the picture in the bottom, you see a little purple ancestral prokaryote. And then you see this infolding of the plasma membrane. Basically, that would be like how the nucleus was formed. Made a little like plasma membrane around the DNA at some point, and it turned out to be evolutionarily viable and stable. And so it remained generation to generation. And then see how the little orange and the little green, aerobic bacterium means a bacteria that does aerobic respiration. So cellular respiration basically makes ATP from organic molecules. And then the cyanobacterium is the green one because it can take energy from the sun and make sugar from it. So basically, see how they're like engulfed? Well, that engulfment wound up, let me pull up my little pointer. That engulfment wound up with having, see how it's a double membrane now? Has a little membrane inside, a membrane, like a dark orange membrane in that one. And then this one has the dark green membrane, and it didn't have that one here. That's because this engulfing, remember, whenever something is engulfed into a cell, it will have like a little vesicle around it, like a little plasma membrane. So it's like there's a plasma membrane and then another plasma membrane, which is one of the evidences that this actually happened. And those double membranes right here, see some organelles have double membranes, outer membrane, maybe vesicular or vesicle in origin. Those membranes are important for energy processing, especially in the mitochondria. And so, but then also there's other things here that are listed in this little chart that are evidences that endosymbiosis is a thing. Mitochondria and chloroplasts can be susceptible to antibiotics, which they're not susceptible to all of them because antibiotics target certain proteins, but they can be susceptible to them. And that shows that there's some sort of bacterial property. The reproduction occurs in a fission-like process. Now, remember, we just finished like going over mitosis and the cell cycle. So that's for eukaryotes, you know, that they have to divide the nucleus. So they go through a cell cycle. Prokaryotes just do what we call binary fission. Might want to jot that down because this is kind of the only time we talk about it. Binary fission is just simply like the DNA replicates and then the cell just pops in half, like out of nowhere. So that's what these particular organelles do as well. And speaking of DNA, they have their own, you know this. And so at some point, like at their own rhythm, not according to the G1, G2 kind of phase, but at their own cycle, they just replicate their DNA and pop, you know, pop the little organelle in half. And then there's 2 mitochondria where there used to just be 1. So their DNA is very prokaryotic-like. It's a single circular instead of like the 2 linear ones that we have, 2 for each chromosome. They just have 1 chromosome, and they don't have 2 of them. They just have 1. And then ribosomes, they have ribosomes which are 70S in size, and that's not something you have to know, like the size of them, but that's identical to a prokaryotic ribosome. So they have ribosomes, but they're more like a prokaryote ribosome rather than a eukaryotic ribosome. So lots of evidence kind of stacking up that mitochondria and chloroplast act a lot like bacteria, and have some characteristics that we usually only find in prokaryotes, okay? So make sure you know that. Okay, so now let's get into some of the energy that we have to deal with when we're talking about these particular organelles. Basically, we don't really have to have the laws of thermodynamics memorized, but they're not that hard to memorize. But what we're looking at as far as the laws of thermodynamics goes as applied to biology, which you kind of have to work the words around and make them apply to biology. And then the second law of thermodynamics hardly even sounds like it at all anymore. But basically, the first thing that you have to know is that energy can't be created or destroyed, but the form of energy can change. So you can change from a chemical energy like this in this picture here, where you have, all the chemical energy is stored in these foods, in carbohydrates and fats. And we know that carbohydrates and fats are some of our highest energy molecules. In fact, fats are long-term energy storage and carbohydrates are short-term. And whenever you eat them, then some chemical waste, some energy will be in that. A lot of our energy is released as heat. So this is no longer like the chemical energy that it was. It's just changed forms. Now we didn't lose the energy anywhere. It didn't get destroyed, but the form was changed. So that's kind of a law of thermodynamics number 1. The law of thermodynamics number 2 is the energy input exceeds energy loss. So it's not like you have to have exactly the amount input as is released from the cell. You actually have to have more input than is released, because the different reactions that occur inside each of the cells are requiring energy. And so then that energy will be stored, and then energy that's released will actually be less than was pulled in. And so typically we have to have a greater input into the system than we have released, or else in the end, we'll have loss of order, which means basically there will be death. There's not enough energy coming in to the cell to maintain the order, to maintain the processes, to maintain the energy of the organism. So there has to be kind of constant input. And then maybe if you're measuring the energy output, you're not seeing as much as went in, but it's being used within cellular processes, okay, or being stored. So those were the 2 laws of thermodynamics and kind of the basics of energy. So there's 2 types of reactions. There's exergonic and endergonic. We don't have to know delta G anymore, thank goodness. That was really no fun. But basically, in an exergonic reaction, you can see in this little graph that you had to have energy input right here. You're starting this much energy right here, and this is how much energy is in your reactants. And then basically then you'll build up your energy, your little reactants, and then energy will be released, and you will have less energy in your products than you do in your reactants. And so then we call that an exergonic, because it's releasing energy into the system. And so when you look at the amount of energy in the products, it is less than was in the reactants. And on the flip side, endergonic, ender is think inside, and so it's pulling energy in. Exit, you can think of exergonic as like getting rid of energy. Endergonic, basically your reactants are low energy. And then as you are, this hump here and both of them is like during the reaction, okay? And so sometimes we know that we have enzymes to help out with that. Sometimes we have ATP helps out with that or whatever. But then in the end, when all is said and done and the reaction is done, your products in an endergonic reaction have a higher energy than the reactants did, okay? And so this is so up here it tells you this is not spontaneous, so you have to actually have work applied to it. You have to add energy into the system to make it work. This one is spontaneous, meaning once you hit a certain level, it'll just go on its own and energy will be released that way, okay? Big idea here, really, what you have to know here. Basically, just know that exergonic reactions release energy or have their products have a lower energy that's stored in them than the reactants did. And just think reactants and products just like a chemical equation. And then in an endergonic, it's actually adding energy into the reaction, and so in the end, you have more energy in your products than you did in the reactants. Okay, so endergonic has a higher energy product than reactants, while exergonic has a lower energy product than the reactants. Okay, so those kind of what you need to know about that. Otherwise, you don't have to get into too much detail, just kind of have that little tidbit memorized. And so photosynthesis here, you can see that this is an endergonic reaction. It has low energy in carbon dioxide and water, and then the light energy is what's added here. So this is what gives you a little power here. And then whenever you make your glucose and your oxygen products in the end, really it's the glucose where you have that high energy. Okay, so it's stored. Now, of course, then we have exergonic reaction would be cellular respiration, which starts out with this high energy glucose and ends up with ATP, which still has energy, just not as much as the stored glucose did. Okay. This is just an example of something we call energy coupling or reaction coupling. We see coupling of reactions in biology where you will have like an endergonic reaction that is coupled with an exergonic reaction. Why that's beneficial to organisms is because otherwise you would have, if energy was released, you would lose all of your energy instead of, it would be just like an energy wasted actually, because, losing energy to heat to the environment doesn't benefit the organism at all. So what happens instead is energy from exergonic reactions that are released basically are put into an endergonic reaction that will then store it. So whenever you end up like losing energy so this is hydrolysis of ATP. So basically you're turning ATP into ADP plus inorganic phosphate. So right here, there's your P with a circle around it. That's your phosphate. So when that happens, you actually have a release of energy. That release of energy could just be lost as heat. And sometimes it probably is. But if it's coupled with an endergonic reaction, say phosphorylation, where you have a phosphate added, then you actually get to turn around and like store that energy back. Now, it doesn't have to be ATP to ADP back to ATP to ATP, but this is actually one that we see, which seems kind of funny. But it can be phosphorylation of something else, right? So you can put that phosphate onto something else and take that energy that was released from hydrolysis of ATP and phosphorylate another protein, and then you've got the energy stored or the energy used for the organism instead of just being like wasted into the environment. Because an exergonic reaction is going to release energy. Well, the organisms benefit to use that energy for something rather than just toss it away. Okay, so that's why we see a coupling. That's called reaction coupling, and we see coupling reactions a lot, especially when you're looking at the hydrolysis of ATP, because once we do that, then that phosphate is typically phosphorylated to something else, which then of course would like capture that energy, so it's not just lost as heat. Okay, so that's energy coupling. That is basically all you need to know about energy at this point. Energy is kind of one of those things that you're just supposed to brush the surface of in AP biology. And then the things that we're really interested in are the pathways of energy, which we'll do in class, photosynthesis and then cellular respiration. They're a little heavier, and so I like to do those in class together. But hopefully you understand just a wee bit about energy and systems, and we'll catch the rest of it later. I would say that also you should make sure you go over the structure of ATP, like what it's made of and how the hydrolysis and phosphorylation of ATP works. So look that up if you're not sure and take a few notes on that as well. Okay, I hope that's helpful. I will see you very soon. Take care.